Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next AMBA and BJ podcast. I'm Victor Hedenberg. I'm the membership director at AMBA and BGA. And with me today, I've got Dr. John Blakey, I should say. Welcome on board for the podcast, John.
Hi, Victor. Great to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, before we go into today's topic, which is about the force for good from a leadership perspective, which a lot of our students and graduates find of interest, given that there are many in leadership positions. Before we go into that, why don't you introduce a little bit about yourself? Who is Dr. John Blakey?
Who is Dr. John Blakey? Wow, big question. Well, I've been many things, a little bit of a kaleidoscope career. Right. I've been both a corporate leader, so I was international managing director in a company called Logica, which was a FTSE 100 global software company. I've been an entrepreneur, so I've started a number of leadership development companies, particularly focused on executive coaching. And more recently, over the last 10 years, I've been a writer and a speaker and a coach. So along the way, I did my MBA, I did my DBA, a lot more recently. So I've always been someone who had a foot in both camps, a foot in academia and learning and looking at the theory of leadership. But I've also been someone who had a very clear foot in the practice of leadership in many different arenas through my career. So, being very blessed to have a very interesting career and trying now to just share that and help others who are on their way in different paths.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very interesting one because you've dipped your toes into various industries. So why don't we start off with a little bit about how you came to this idea of leadership for good? Why did you feel like this was something that you needed to address?
I think the experience of the pandemic was pivotal in the inspiration for this latest book. During the pandemic, I was leading a business. I was working with a lot of CEOs who were also leading businesses, large and small. And I think in that time, we experienced challenges that we hadn't previously come across. And I met a lot of CEOs in that time who were very competent, very resilient individuals, but did find in the midst of that challenge that they started to ask themselves big questions. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Was a question that I heard many times in coaching sessions in that period. And indeed myself, I woke up on some Monday mornings and asked myself the question, is it worth it? And I think when we ask ourselves that question, these are big questions, and what people were asking themselves in that time was, given that our world had been turned upside down, it gave us time to think about things, to step back, get off the hamster wheel, and actually ask ourselves bigger questions like, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard? What is the output of this? What is the impact of this? And I think that collective question led a lot of us to think, the traditional paradigm of business as a force for wealth generation, is it time to expand that vision and talk about business as a force for good? Now, obviously, it's not a completely new idea. There's been a lot of people in business who've been a force for good for many, many years. But are we at a time when we collectively need to think what that means in 2025? So
then let's go into that. What does that mean? Because you would always think that someone who's a business leader would want to do something good for society. They probably have a product or service, or they're running their own company, they're entrepreneurs. So you would almost think that automatically they want to do something good, but I guess this takes it a step further.
Yeah, I think good in a business sense has often been seen about the purpose of business is providing employment, wealth generation, delivering quality goods and services. What we're talking about in my book is saying, okay, let's do all that, great, but let's see that as the ticket to the next stage of the game. And the next stage of the game is how can we expand the impact of business to influence broader issues in the world which align with our values. So a lot of business, all businesses have values, and we tend to apply those internally and with our customers and immediate stakeholders. But I think Force for Good is about thinking about how might those values play out on a bigger stage, and is it time for business to think about the biggest stage that it could play on, given that the world has a number of intractable challenges and issues, both now and coming along in the future. So the talent that's in business, the incredible talent that is in business, is it too small to give that talent just that paradigm of wealth generation and profit? Do we need to give that talent the paradigm of purpose and say, that's the field that you're playing on?
Yeah. So who would you say, because we have a very interesting business climate today, who would you say stand out as CEOs in today's climate who are more purpose-driven rather than, profit-driven in this case?
Yeah, I'm going to cite someone who is a former CEO, but nevertheless I think the brand is still a brand that stands for purpose, and that would be Unilever. So the CEO of Unilever for 10 years, Paul Polman, he wrote the foreword for my previous book, The Trusted Executive, and I was delighted that he wrote the foreword because he's someone who, from my point of view, has been an inspiration in my career in terms of someone who had the courage to commit Unilever to a path that was both profit and purpose. And Unilever had its sustainable living plan, which was a 10-year plan to double its share price and also to lift thousands of people out of poverty around the globe. So that triple bottom line thinking, that profit, people, planet thinking, I think on a corporate stage, Unilever is still a great ambassador for that work. And of course, at the SME level, we have now a movement of businesses. B Corp is a movement of businesses that started in 2006 in the US, and its strapline is making business a force for good. So that phrase "force for good" isn't a phrase that I dreamt up. It's a mission that B Corp already has, and in this country, in the UK, we are leading the way in terms of the number of businesses that are accredited B Corps. We have over 2,000 businesses accredited as B Corps in the UK, growing exponentially each year, and so that's a movement, that's a community of leaders, business leaders who've said, hang on a minute, we want to be known for being a force for good. And the vision of B Corp in the UK is that in 10 years' time, every business will be known for being a force for good. Very ambitious vision, but I think a very exciting vision as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So with regards to having that force for good focus or delivering something for people, planets, does that in any way take away from the profit? Because ultimately a business has to have that as one of its priorities, otherwise you can't reinvest. So does it take away in any way? Is there any research that shows that actually, on the flip side, it actually helps with profits more? What's your experience been there?
Yeah, my research field has particularly been on the research into trust as a component of a purposeful organisation, and there are many research studies that can show the link between high trust cultures in business and the bottom line and profit. So you can find evidence that would say that doing good is also good for business, good for profit. Now, not everybody believes this. Not everybody believes this, and I think we're at a particular time where we are still waxing and waning around our commitment to this ethos. Probably right now, there's a pushback on this in terms of, hang on a minute, we need to stick to the knitting, we need to focus on, commercial reality. When times are tough, we're obviously going to get a bit squeezed around shrinking back maybe into that survival space around profit. But I think those organizations that are looking at the longer term, that are setting out objectives around their brand over the next 10 years, that sustainable long-term path, I believe, will be fueled by purpose rather than quarterly profits.
Right. It's really interesting because I can't remember his name precisely, but it was one of the Austrian economists out of University of Chicago Business School, I think it was, and they were talking about the fact that businesses should only focus on profit. That's their ultimate goal. And by focusing on profit, it means if they're profitable, they're generating value and they're probably doing something good. So everything else is nonsense, basically.
Yeah.
But is he wrong? Is that the sort of wrong mentality to have as a business? And why so?
Well, I think a lot of it about wrong, I think a lot of it's about it's situational. You know,
Right.
Is it wrong? Is it right? I'm not saying that making profit is bad or wrong. It's about putting it into context. And I think, I mean, Milton Friedman was an economist,
That's
I think, who
yeah.
said this, and
Yeah.
he said that in 1970.
Right.
So we have to ask ourselves, how has the world changed between 1970 and 2025? Or are we saying the world hasn't changed at all?
Yeah, well, right.
So if the world has changed radically, and I think most of us would say it has changed radically, wouldn't we expect that changed context for business might have influenced its purpose and its role? I think it would be quite hard to imagine that should have just stayed fixed when we think about all the changes that have influenced other institutional life in that time,
Indeed.
and politics being an example. It's an evolving context for business, and I think leadership is about anticipating where is it going in the future and being at the forefront of that. And we are facing challenges now that we weren't facing in 1970. Climate change, AI, global poverty, population explosion,
Deforestation.
deforestation. I mean, we're in an environment now, I think, where compared to 1970, there are global systemic issues, whereas back in 1970, I think we were still in our little islands, in a little sort of protected sort of bubbles. And it's harder and harder to convince yourself that that's the sort of world that we're going to have for the next 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, with being a force for good, it's not, I assume, only about being external and having a purpose, but it's about also instilling that purpose into your staff and developing them and so forth. How does that translate into building a cohesive and strong team or a strong company culture?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about leading by example or role modeling for an individual leader. My research on trust demonstrated that the single biggest factor in building a high trust culture is the behaviour of the CEO and the senior leadership team.
Okay.
I mean, we might naturally have thought that there would be a strong correlation there, but the science has backed it up. So that leading by example, that role modeling, that emotional contagion, if you like, of the leader's behaviour and everybody copying that over a period of time is a powerful lever of culture. And therefore, what I do in my work, because I work a lot with individual leaders, one-to-one, I'm wanting to build their confidence that their behaviour matters, both in a good way and a bad way.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing the chief exec of the co-op a number of years ago, and he told me that when he walked into his reception, if he saw a piece of litter on the ground, that he would pick it up and put it in the bin, because he would know that everybody's watching that all the time. And sometimes these micro behaviours, we can be surprised at how much they're mimicked and picked up by others around us, particularly if we're leaders, because we have an ability to influence other people. So I think the leader's role in creating a purpose-driven culture starts with them thinking about their own individual purpose and how they are living that out, how they articulate that, and in particular, how they sustain that purpose-driven approach through the ups and downs of business life. Because it's one thing to declare a change the world sort of mission and everybody gets excited about that, but 6 months later, when you're under pressure from your shareholders and you've got all sorts of issues in your inbox, how are you going to consistently stay true to that for the long haul? Because many of the leaders I work with, and I work with a lot of purpose-driven leaders, they've already made the choice to be purpose-driven. The next challenge is, how do I thrive in that role? And a lot of my book, Force for Good, is partly, yes, make the decision, but also what happens next. How do you thrive? Because for me, it's a different role. It's got a different set of challenges than a purely profit-driven role, and therefore to be equipped for that journey, to stay resilient and motivated along that journey, I think is a specific challenge.
Okay, so how about, because this is a really relevant problem for a lot of CEOs. Let's say they have this purpose, and they strongly believe in it, but they also have, other stakeholders. The board is pushing them, and you've got, maybe you're a listed company, a FTSE company, and you have the reports to file, and all of a sudden, the sort of decisions you need to make I'm not saying they have to, might have to conflict with the sort of purpose that the organization stands for. What should a leader do in such a situation? And I mean, is there a way out of that, or do you walk off and say, this is not for me?
Well, I think openness of communication is key. So I think people need a lot of help to understand decisions that are being made that might be driven more by short-term challenges versus that long-term vision, that purpose-driven vision. And people need a lot of help to continue to create the sort of audit trail between the purpose and the reality, the day-to-day reality of a company. Because people are naturally going to jump on anything that appears to be contradictory or hypocritical in terms of that purpose that's been declared. So I think, as we've often heard, that communication, the habit of being open and sharing, and if in doubt, sharing more around the process through which decisions are being made, how short-term challenges affect long-term visions. I think most people, if they're given good reasons and they see that openness, are willing to accept that there's going to be bumps along the road. And there's going to be still tough decisions that are made. Just the moment you become a purpose-driven leader or company doesn't mean that you've suddenly escaped all the dilemmas of business life. But I think probably what it means is you need to help people understand your thinking and walk them through the decision-making that's going on for you and the board or the decision-making group. Because they will be very quick to jump on anything that appears to be out of kilter with that purpose-driven mantra. Yeah,
absolutely. Speaking of following on that track, if, let's say, a person who had this sort of mission and objective left an organization, in theory, they should be able to instill this to the rest of the organization so they keep, let's say, the same ideas and concepts and so forth. Yep. So what I guess I'm trying to get at is, does it always come from the top, or is it something that, regardless of who comes in and out, so long as it's been embedded into the culture, that everyone is still on the same page? Or can that change very quickly if you get a leader for, let's say, a force for bad, which is, I guess, the flip side of what you've mentioned in your book?
Yeah. Well, I was delivering a workshop a couple of weeks ago to a leadership team, and one of the teams is the founder of the business. And the reason they engaged me to help them was that he's looking to move on from that business, and he's worried about what's going to happen to the values of that company when he leaves. And he came out with this phrase which I really liked, which was that culture is his succession plan. And I've not heard it put quite that simply before. But of course, it made a lot of sense to me that if you're succession planning around an individual, often you think about other individuals who might step in. But I think it's equally, if not more relevant, to think about culture being the succession plan. So one of the things that this leader was doing was they recognized that they have their own personal values, which they're role modeling. But as a company grows, it helps to capture those values and institutionalize them. Yeah. And that's where models and frameworks can help. So the particular model that we were working with that team was the 9 Habits of Trust, because it takes a vague emotional word like trust, which everybody thinks is important, but it means different things to different people, and breaks it down into 9 practical, manageable behaviours. Okay. So there are ways of taking that implicit culture and making it explicit. And I think the more explicit you can make a culture, the more you can codify it, the less dependent you are on that one individual leader who might leave tomorrow. Yeah. and of course we see this in sport as well, don't we? We've seen some clubs, Manchester United would be a good example of a club that sort of imploded, but when it lost its charismatic leader in Alex Ferguson. But equally, we've seen clubs like Brighton, I think would be a really good example for those of us that know our football, that have institutionalised their way of doing things in such a fashion that they've been through a number of managers over the last few years. But in terms of their style of play, the way they go about things, it doesn't appear to miss a beat as they move from one manager to the next. Yeah. So I think the challenge for leaders, if they're concerned about that succession, is to think about culture, but think about explicit models and tools that can codify the way we do things around here, such that when the new person comes in, they're not coming into a vacuum, they're coming into something that is already clear and explicit and works.
Yeah. So that's very helpful. What about on the other side? Let's say, because we have a lot of MBAs now who are graduating and they might go into their first leadership position or maybe starting their own company. I guess it would be less true for someone starting their own company, but someone who goes into a current environment, let's say a company where, let's say, there isn't really a purpose behind what's going on. Yeah. Maybe it's a company that's been around for a long time or it's had a lot of bad leaders, one after the other. You're in. How do you clean up that mess? Where do you start?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to start by delivering results. You know, the way you get currency in a leadership role is first and foremost by delivering results. You know, I mentioned I worked in a number of large companies in my time, and I wasn't the chief exec of those companies. How did I over time exert influence? Firstly, I needed to deliver results. Yeah. You know, that's how you get a voice.
Right.
But I think what's maybe the more crucial step is that once you've established that reputation for being someone who gets results, using that reputation, that voice that you've been given, to start to influence wider cultural aspects of the organisation. Because once you've delivered results, people will start to ask you, well, how did you do it? And that's when you get the opportunity to talk about behaviours and cultures and, you know, building a microculture in a team, for example, that delivers fantastic results is going to attract attention, and people are going to get curious, and they will get to that point where they'll say to you, so what's going on? You know, what are you doing around here? Because it seems to work. Maybe we could do it elsewhere. I think what the bad news for anybody listening to this is that takes time, and it can sometimes take years rather than months. And in that period, you know, if you're in that environment for a long period, it can weigh you down. You've got to make sure you stay part of the solution rather than becoming part of the problem. And if you stay part of the solution, if you keep your own personal resilience, you will get the opportunity to influence things. And it's often a matter of waiting for that opportunity to arise.
Build the credibility.
Build the coalition of people. You know, that obviously also helps. There'll be other people who believe in what you believe as well, and you know, over time you can build coalitions. But I think probably the biggest advice around that is it can take longer you think, and sometimes people give up too soon. So I talk in the book about giving up on a bad day. Don't give up on a bad day. You know, give up on a good day, and if you wait long enough, the good day will come. But sometimes it doesn't come quite as quick as you'd hope.
Tell me about that.
Yeah.
Well, so how about this one? Because I've heard this from quite a few people who will come in as a senior manager, and they're in charge, let's say, of a sales and a marketing team. And you've got, you know, people stuck in their old ways, and you have to deliver results right away. So maybe you don't have the credibility yet, but what sort of actions can you do to instill this force for good mentality and changing the habits of the team? Maybe you can't do it in the same way as once you have the credibility, but is there any small micro, let's say, behaviors that you can teach them, let's say?
Yeah, again, I'm thinking about personal example and role modeling. if as a leader people see that you are spending an hour a week, a day a month, a week a year on doing something that is not directly about, the immediate short-term result, but you might be volunteering for some, to support some community initiative. You might be on the board of a not-for-profit that's focused on sustainability.
Yeah.
One of the challenges I work with a lot of leaders in this situation, where they've got their day job, and things are not going to change sort of instantly in that day job. But then the question can be, how could you build a portfolio around that day job that showcases your values and your purpose?
Yeah.
And most organizations will support that. Most organizations get it in that extent, and that starts to role model and also obviously supporting members of your team who might also have a particular passion, a particular purpose, and they want your personal support with that, whether that's through sponsoring it or whether that's through giving them a bit of time or flexibility to pursue that. I think those steps can go a long way in terms of starting to bring to life a purpose-driven environment when the wider company culture hasn't maybe quite got there.
Yeah.
So I think there's always more that you can do. You have to sometimes be a bit creative, think outside the box, and don't look to your existing employer for everything. There are many different ways in which you can express your purpose outside of your immediate direct employer, and other people will see that, other people will hear about it, and that can be influential in your sort of role, whatever level you're operating at.
Oh, excellent. You obviously work with a lot of leaders already, and you get to see a lot of different organizations. What's your general take on the market as it is? Is there enough of a focus on having a purpose as a business beyond just the bottom line, or is it not there what needs to be? And if so, why? What are some reasons you think?
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting time. On the one hand, you've got B Corp, the rise of B Corp, which I talked about earlier, which would suggest that there's a shift in that direction. On the other hand, in corporates, I think there's a bit of a pushback at the moment on, we need to focus on commercial reality, and are some of these other things a distraction from that? I do a lot of work in the public sector and the third sector, so obviously this shows up very differently there. If you're working with a leader of an ambulance trust or a hospital, then talking to them about purpose,
it comes implicitly.
Yeah, it's there, isn't it? And obviously third sector, it's the same. So it's a very diverse climate out there at the moment, I think, and it probably means that people need to be very discerning about where their talent is best utilised, because you can find yourself in environments that foster purpose in you and those around you, and you can find yourself in environments that quash that, or at least make it sort of a side issue rather than a mainstream aspect. So I think really doing your homework around the culture of a company. There's the PowerPoint that tells you what it ought to be, and the glossy sort of brochures, but really getting under the skin of that, the more that can be done, because I think these choices are important. I mean, in my career, it's been the environment that I've worked in that has been the biggest determinant of my own performance and progress. I've been the same person turning up for work for however many years, but the environments I've been in have either brought the best out in me, or they haven't. And I think that would be, for me, the single biggest factor is to find those environments. And if you're a purpose-driven individual and these things matter to you, align yourselves with organisations that are also on that page, because it will turbocharge your own motivation and performance, compared to being in an environment that feels out of sync with your personal values. So
what are some tools or methods that you would suggest people who have this sort of purpose mentality who are stepping into a leadership role, are there any, say, methods that they can use for themselves, but also for the rest of the team that you would recommend?
Yeah, and that was one of the motivations for writing the book. I'm a big fan of like models and methods for all the reasons that we've talked about. And so in the book, I capture a model which has three dimensions of purpose-driven leadership. And I talk about the up, the in, and the out of purpose-driven leadership. And these are very simple words. You know, it's like two-letter words and one three-letter word. So hopefully fairly easy to remember. But what's that all about? The up of purpose-driven leadership is all about things we've been talking about. How do you identify that purpose? How do you connect with it? And how do you feel the joy of it and stay feeling the joy of it over the period of time? So we've got tools and techniques for how we boost that up of purpose-driven leadership. Then we have the in of purpose-driven leadership, which is about, we may well be very connected with our purpose, but halfway through the race we run out of our energy because we've just not looked after our own motivation, our own resilience, our own well-being. And in a purpose-driven role, it's not easy. You know, you're going to get a lot of pushback. So that in of purpose-driven leadership is equally important. And then the third piece, which again we've talked about, is how do you bring other people with you? The out is how do you create followership around purpose? And so in my experience, most leaders are pretty natural at 2 out of the 3, but they need a bit of help at the third one, and they need help to make sure that doesn't become the Achilles heel. And if I took myself as an example, I'm pretty natural at the up. You know, when I write books, I speak, you know, it's always come more natural to me to think big about the future and be motivated by that. I've learned a lot of my career about how to handle the in. Coaching has helped me a lot, and being a coach has helped me a lot to understand how I take care of myself, how I look at my own motivation, resilience and well-being. The one I've had the biggest challenges with over the years would be the out, because sometimes the intensity of my vision can alienate people, because I want to do it tomorrow. I want to do it tomorrow, and I want to do something big tomorrow. And you have to realize that not everybody is going to wake up in the morning wanting to do that mission as passionately as you, and you have to sort of then work at how do you make sure that you don't look over your shoulder and there's nobody behind you. You know, it's that bringing people along with you. So I think every leader will find that they are natural at, you know, one or more of those dimensions, but needs a little bit of help with the third. And you know, that's where tools, techniques, coaching can help make sure that doesn't become the Achilles heel. Yeah,
absolutely. You've mentioned basically that you've invited attendees to assess their purpose-driven leadership style as either a zealot, martyr, or Pied Piper?
Yeah, Pied Piper.
So go into a little bit. What are you referring to here?
Yeah, well, this builds on the last question, really, because, for example, if you're a leader who is strong at the up and the in, like me, but you're weaker at the out, then the leadership persona I'm suggesting you have is that of the zealot. And, you know, we know zealots, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, you know, zealots can be very energized, very driven, and they can achieve a lot. But we also know there's a downside to that persona. And equally, if you are strong at the up, strong at the out, but weak at the in, then the persona I suggest there is the martyr. That you're so passionate about the mission, you care so much for the people that are coming with you, that you self-sacrifice to the point where you run out of your own resources. And that's that martyr sort of tendency. And finally, the Pied Piper. Pied Piper is a German folk tale about a charismatic guy that was brought into a village to rid it of rats, and played very fancy tunes on his pipe, led all the rats out of the town, but unfortunately wasn't paid then by the town parishioners, and so he took his pipe, played a different tune, and took all the children into a cave and left them there. so this leader is great at the out. They can play lots of great tunes, they can lead people anywhere, but sometimes their challenge is they don't know where they're going. They're weak at the up, they're not connected to a purpose.
Yeah.
So they can take people anywhere and people will follow them, but they might sometimes end up in a cave.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be there.
You wouldn't want to be there. So I use these personas and models to help leaders think about this challenge.
Right.
And, that we can create then questionnaires that help people, decide. When I do this with a workshop with a group of leaders, and they've all thought about this and done the questionnaire, I get them to sit as team zealot, team martyr, and team Pied Piper. And then I get them to think about some challenges, which typically they would find, more difficult than others. So it's just a case of giving people a language, having a bit of fun, getting people to work with this so they can pull out of it the things that's most valuable to them.
Is there a particular group that usually has more people in it?
Well, it's an interesting question. The book came out in August, so I'm sort of still doing the field trials,
right.
If you like. But what I've noticed is that, that there are quite a lot of zealots out there.
I see.
Quite a lot of zealots, quite a lot of martyrs. I'd say the group that is less represented is probably the Pied Pipers. Where you get more Pied Pipers is in a larger corporate environment, because in an entrepreneurial environment, it would be difficult to start a company if you didn't have that vision and passion. But in a corporate environment, there's more risk that you might have signed up for something that you didn't fully understand, or you're not thinking about it in that sort of way. You're just earning a living and doing the 9 to 5. There's more of a risk that you might get disconnected from your purpose, and over a long period of time, that is going to cause you challenges. You're going to find it difficult to sustain performance indefinitely in an environment that doesn't align with your purpose. So, and obviously, if you're younger, I've done this workshop with a number of different diverse groups of leaders. If you're a younger leader, sometimes that Pied Piper risk is stronger, because you might be focused on, I just need to get the job, I need the job title, I need to earn a certain amount of money, and obviously that's all important. But also, don't forget, there is a purpose. You've got values. You stand for something, and are you working sufficiently hard to understand that alongside these more tangible, practical things that you need to take care of from week to week?
Absolutely, and I would say I'll just go to an example. We did a workshop or a seminar for students and graduates a couple of years ago. These were MBA students, a couple of graduates as well. And I remember one of them, a young guy from India, talking about the fact that they weren't really sure what their purpose was. And they've got a good job. It was at one of the banks. I can't remember which one it was, and making a good living, but they just don't know the purpose. And I think that might be fine in the beginning. You're making a good living, and it's all fine. But then as the years go by, you start asking that question that you stated at the very beginning here. Is it worth it? And I think the big problem I see is that people just don't have the time to reflect and think, what is my purpose? Are there any methods for someone who's in that position currently to take a step back and reflect which pathway they should take? What are they really passionate about? Because it feels like we just don't have time in today's society. Yeah,
and that's why I think the pandemic, as you said, people suddenly had a lot of time to think. And so these questions started to suddenly crop up for people. Now we're back into business as usual, if you like, and people, as you say, might not readily get reflection time. I mean, clearly coaching is a resource that a lot of people use to think about purpose and to create some protected reflection time. So I think that's a tool. Not everybody is going to have access to it in organisational life, but very powerful tool, I think. But there are certain exercises that, one of the most powerful coaching exercises that I offer to my clients, and indeed it's an exercise that I did sort of 25 years ago, was an exercise to help me understand what my personal values are. And you sort of think about that question, you think, well, I sort of know that, don't I, really? But it's amazing if you're put in a situation to really think about that question and bring it to life, what the specific 5 to 7 values might be that on the one hand, if they're being honoured, you're having the most fantastic sort of fulfilling experience, and B, if they're being trampled upon, you're going to really find that a difficult environment to stay in. And then how you use those values. I mean, I have a technique every week on a Sunday evening, and I've done this for probably 12, 13 years.
Yeah.
I sit down, and it might only take me 10 minutes, but I look at my values, what I've got on my app. I look at the values, and I look at the diary for the coming week, and I map the activities in my diary to my values. So, for example, like here we are today, one of my values is sharing. Mm-hmm. So I look at my diary for this week, and here I am, and we're sharing, and I'm getting the opportunity to share. So I'm honouring my values. Mm-hmm. I write books. I write books that challenge some of the mainstream thinking. That takes a bit of courage. One of my values is courage. So I think it's been really helpful for me and for some of the clients that I've worked with around this to be able to name those 5 to 7 values and then to bring them to life. Yeah. A bit like a company, you know what those values are, but are you really living them? Mm-hmm. And what we do for companies, we can do for individuals. So what are those 5 to 7? And how are you over time building them into your routine and your habits and your diary? Because you can imagine if you do that for 10 years, it has an impact. Yeah. It's like brushing your teeth, you if you do something every day or every week, you get those sort of habits going, over time, the compound impact of that type of approach is really powerful. Yeah, absolutely. It's something you don't actively have to think about. It's just part of how you do your day-to-day business. Yeah. So I think there are these, and you can, that's why, again, people haven't got access to coaching. Then there are books, there are many books out there that will help people understand what their purpose is, and then give them habits to allow them to stay connected to that purpose and to build it into their mindset in a more tangible and powerful way. Yeah, absolutely. So what sort of follow-up resources do you think our audience could make use of that we're talking about sharing? What sort of follow-up resources do you have that they can access following this podcast? Yeah. Well, there's the book. Always have a handy copy with me. There's a book. I have a website, johnblakey.co.uk, and on the website you can download the questionnaire that allows you to assess whether you're more of that zealot, martyr, Pied Piper persona. So that's available on the website. And equally, there are now, obviously the book's been out for 6 months or so. I've been on the road. There are a lot of podcasts out there now. There are interviews and articles and what have you. So I'd like to think, that a quick Google of Force for Good, John Blakey, will generate quite a range now of resources that people can access, which would get them, the next step in terms of understanding this work and working out if it's something that could make a difference for them right now. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. So if you were to summarize now, something that you'd like to tell the audience, something to think about, and keeping in mind, of course, that these are people maybe in a leadership position already or are prepping to go into a leadership position given that they're doing their MBAs. But what would you tell them? Well, the strapline for the book is inside each leader is a force for good and a force for bad. Which one wins? The one you feed. Right. So, on the one hand, I think that's very realistic. Each of us, none of us is a force for good 100% of the time throughout our whole lives. So we each have the capacity for both. But I think what's hopeful about that reality and that sort of message is that which one wins? The one you feed. We have a choice, about where we direct our energy and efforts over a period of time. And I talked about that compound interest of building good habits over a period of time. There's a quote used in the book about most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And so if you're thinking big, thinking that 10-year vision, feeding the good wolf over that period of time, focused on being a force for good, then it's amazing what people can achieve. Yeah.
I think going back to your example, where you said those micro behaviors, they have such a big impact, and we always forget that. You know, if you're a part of a leadership team and you want to keep things tidy, you pick up the things yourself.
Yeah.
And it sounds quite trivial, but in reality, if you do that in all the small areas, eventually, as you said, it compounds.
Yeah.
So maybe something worth for everyone to think about going forward.
Yeah, it's like I think it's Jordan Peterson's 12
rules.
12 rules.
Yeah.
Make your bed.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
make your
it's
bed.
like,
Yeah.
make your bed. I mean, so there, what are these like little disciplines that make you each day sort of and that build up then, you know, daily disciplines, weekly disciplines, monthly, and you know, I think the compound effect of all of that is massive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Pleasure.
And thank you for everyone in the audience who have listened to the podcast. We'll be back shortly with a new speaker and a new topic, so stay tuned. And thank you.
Thank you.